Welcome back to another episode of Emotional Mastery with Rochelle podcast, the podcast where we talk about all things emotional, all things healing, all things human design, astrology, everything I've learned within this 6-3 emotional manifesting journey of mine that has just really helped me heal and grow and come into awareness of myself, of others. It's just been my space to share all of this with you in the hopes that something resonates and you can take some of these tools and action steps and really implement them in your life and start your own healing journey. This specific episode I'm really excited for. I sat with Kerri Hummingbird, who is a soul guide and host of the Soul Nectar podcast. She's the #1 international best-selling author of The Second Wave, Transcending the Human Drama, award-winning best-selling book, Awakening to Me, One Woman's Journey to Self-Love, which really describes the early years of her spiritual awakening. Kerri inspires people to lead their lives wide awake and with authenticity, passion, and purpose that positively impact others. She catalyzes mind shifts that transform life challenges into gifts of wisdom, and her newest book is already an #1 international bestseller. It's called Love is Fierce, Healing the Mother Wound, and describes the most direct path to spiritual enlightenment. And the mother wound is huge, which is why I was so excited to have her on this podcast and really dig into that. Because whether you are a woman or whether you are a man, this mother wound, this wounding that we carry for generations and generations is within us. Whether it's from our mother or our great-grandmother or our grandmother, whatever the lineage is, even our fathers who have wounding from their mothers. It's just a really powerful wound that we all have to face, especially if you're on this path. There will become a time that you will be facing this. And so it was really important to sit and talk and have that conversation and bring this to you through this conversation. So without further ado, I will let the episode speak for itself. I would love for you guys to share, rate, review, subscribe, whatever you feel called to do. Email me, reach out. Everything is in the show notes as always. And I really hope that you all love this episode as much as I loved having this conversation. And so here it is. So welcome, Kerri, to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. I always start with just a little, tell us as much or as little as you like about yourself, about your journey, especially the topic today is the mother wound. So I'm sure there's, a story that goes along with that made you come to this, place and heal that side of yourself. And anything I know you do gene keys, so human design, astrology, literally anything that you want to tell us about yourself, just as your introduction.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, and just so grateful to be here in this space. So my journey really began with some challenges, 0 to 5. And, that's the time that our brains are being formed as children, is that 0 to 5, 0 to 7. And during that time, I was living in some darkness with some challenges that my mom had in her relationships. And my mom was being a warrior of love. A lot of mothers have a hard time getting the courage to leave when things are not so good for their kids or for themselves. And my mother was always a warrior in that way, that she would leave a situation that was going to be harmful. But, it takes time to leave a situation that's harmful. And especially when, in my mom's generation, when I was born in 1969, so you can kind of do the math, I'm 52. And during that time, it was really rare for a woman to provide for herself and her child as a single mother. That was a rare thing. And so we kind of had this idea or reality in which women needed a man in order to survive. So that was the situation I was a young child in. And that's all part of the mother wound too, right? I mean, just the fact that a woman needs a man to survive. Of course, we're healing that culturally. So now today, people can survive and be single moms, and they don't need to have a man that's abusive if he is, So there's that. And so a lot of those patterns that were set in my early time, those have rippled out into my life and been themes of my life that I've been healing in myself. And at every key initiation point in my life, those themes would resurface for a look, for an exploration, for healing, for me to see them, witness them, and heal them. So when I was a teenager and got into puberty, of course, what happens? These early childhood wounds, they resurface because I'm starting to engage in relationship in new ways, in intimate ways. I'm starting to work with my body. I'm feeling my body. And so this early experience of having a father who would, maybe molest me because of his own wounding as a child and how his mother treated him and the things that were going on, that resurfaces in my sexuality, in my sexual identity. And the experiences that I had with violence in the second relationship my mother had, and witnessing violence in the relationship between the masculine and the feminine. I mean, he tried to throw my mother off a third-story balcony. So that there's like the fear of that. Then that also sets up the context of my identity in relationship. Who am I going to attract? So I started attracting violence to me. I had a situation where I kissed a boy, and it turned out he had a girlfriend, and it turned out she was a town bully, so she gathered 100 kids around the school bus stop to beat me up. So I had these really powerful experiences throughout my life of this wounding, and every initiation they would get bigger and stronger. And certainly when I became a mother, the shit hit the fan. So you become a mother, like your body just goes through so many changes to bring this new life into being. And so the wounding that hasn't been healed from the previous initiations, the things that were undone, the things that needed my attention, they all rose up in my body for healing. And I had postpartum depression that was fairly deep and difficult with my first child. And so I ended up getting into psychotherapy even deeper because I'd already been in it from the first initiation at 15, and taking the pills, to not, help you cope with all that stuff that, is dragging you down when you've got to get up at 2 a.m. and feed the baby, so there's just like realities, right? So a lot of my life went that way, not really understanding fully why it was happening and just doing my best to cope with it in the moment. And the tools that were given to me along the way were helpful, and they weren't the solution. So it was helpful for me to go through 20 years of weekly psychotherapy sessions from the time I was 15-ish, 15, 20. But was that a solution? No, that didn't solve anything. It showed me what was going on. It showed me glimpses. It helped me have some support along the way. It just was coping with it. And then the same with the pills. The pills came when I had my baby, and then that was just helped me cope, but it didn't really help me heal. So my journey's really been about not stopping until I get to the root of it. So when I got down into my darkest tunnel, round about, 38, I was really getting like suicidal. Like this, I'd already had those thoughts along the way, and I'd been pretty strong. By now I've got 2 young children. I've got the husband that I had birthed the children with, and I was just moved and gone closer to being with my mom, closer to my mom and dad, thinking that would help. My jaw was so tight, it could just grinding my teeth at night, and nightmares at night, and hot sweats, and just so much pain, and not knowing what to do with any of it, just kind of like bursting at the seams, because I was a person that didn't like conflict back to my first stepfather. That was, to me, that was bad. So if you got angry, that made you a bad person, just like he was. I didn't want to be like mean Fred. So I wouldn't let myself be angry. And so I spent my life trying to keep peace by not being angry, which was kind of just not admitting how I actually felt, which led to all of those psychotherapy sessions. And so at the end of that rope, there was a spirit sign that said, that's the end of the rope. You need to get out of here or you're going to die. So I did. I took the leap, and I did it not so gracefully if you ask my ex-husband, but I did it. I took the leap. Martin Luther King says, if you can't fly, then run. And if you can't run, then walk. And if you can't walk, then crawl. And I was crawling, and I crawled my way up. So I burned down that forest, and I started a new one. And ever since then is when I really got into the groove, because I started getting into modalities of healing and insights that actually helped me to start really deeply healing and restoring and replenishing and filling back up again, and figuring out like who I am. And actually, it's not even like figuring out, it's more like revealing. Like all of these things kept happening to reveal more of me, to reveal more of my truth, to remind me of who I really was, even before all that trauma happened in my early childhood, like who I am beyond this life, who I am in the biggest sense, and help me reconnect with the earth and to open my heart back up again. So these are all, like, my whole journey has revealed so many aspects of the mother wound. and how it's disconnected us from our humanity, how it's disconnected us from ourselves, from our feelings, from our bodies, from our soul's destiny and curriculums, from who we really are. And how when we go into that deepest, darkest hole, that's the hardest thing to face, we find ourselves whole and complete inside there. And then we can heal our relationships. Like my relationship with my mother is like awesome now. It's like we can talk, we understand each other. I feel love in my heart. I don't feel that fear I used to feel, because I've healed all those early things and I've gotten access to my higher self and my connection to the earth, which helps me show up with my heart open. So that's just a roundabout way to touch on some of the themes that I think many of us experience. Yeah,
that's beautiful. It's when I read your introduction in your book, Love is Fierce, it was just so much. The vulnerability is beautiful. You can feel it. And I think just a lot of people resonate with that. And it's something that I think, especially on this journey, like as a woman, my story is a little bit different, but I feel like, especially like being a mother to a daughter, I think she experienced some of those things where I was in an abusive relationship and it got to the point where he went for a job interview and I packed everything I could and I just left. That was like my only option, right? Because I knew I didn't want my kids to think that was normal. And at that point I wasn't in spirituality. Like you said, it just that kind of, I went to therapy for years and it was like this EMDR therapy. And I felt like I wasn't really getting to the root of it. Like I was able to deal with triggers in a different way than before, but then it was like, then the modalities and the spirituality and the human design and all these other healing things came in. And like you talk about nature in the book a lot. And I think that's something that I feel like so called to often. Like when I get emotional, it's like, I want to go run or I just want to sit like next to a tree and just, like those are the things that call to me. So I think that's beautiful within the book. You touch on that a lot, like just kind of coming back to nature.
Yeah, nature's helped me a lot, because Rochelle, like along the way of my journey, I encountered this Western psychotherapy model. And it's interesting because it's actually representational of how we think overall in our society, is that we want to label things and put them in boxes. We want to put a label on it as a problem, as like aberrant or it shouldn't be happening, and then put it in some box and then put it on a shelf and kind of like, shun it or shame it and put it out there. And that's what a lot of psychotherapy labels, while initially a person feels some sense of relief, like, oh, I finally know what's wrong with me, it's actually a huge trap because then it gives you something to identify yourself as. So in my journey with the emotions, for example, like emotions, well, let's just say emotions are a huge deal for every human being alive on this planet. And the only difference between me and someone else maybe who isn't having problems with emotions is that my channel for emotions might just be way huger. Like I think that we all have different roles and different life's purposes. And some of us have what's called like we're empaths. So we feel everything so deeply. We feel the depth of feeling that some people don't feel. And so they call it aberrant. And it's like, no, it's just like I am a unique being and I am filled up with feeling. Like I can feel everything. If I right now, I could feel Japan right now and I'm in Austin. Like if I want to, and it's not just an imagination, like I can feel things. I can feel people down the street. I can feel people at the next table if I'm eating out at the restaurant. I can feel everything that's going on. And it's like, the more clear I get in myself, the more I feel. And it's not a problem. It's actually a blessing. It's a huge gift when in right relationship. But when we're shunning it and shaming it and trying to repress it and we're, labeling it and putting it up and saying, well, you're this or that and that's a problem and it's hard for any of us to be in relationship with you because you're like that, is kind of like it gets stunted, it gets blocked up and congested, and then we can't actually be in our full gift of the empathy that is ours to claim and be for the world. Like that's just so powerful to be an empath.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. Like in therapy, and I think therapy is a beautiful thing. If anybody feels called to it, absolutely. Like I think they should. But it was that sense of like, this is what's wrong with me, right? Instead of like, I feel like when I came to spirituality and I came like, for me, it was human design to like see everything. It was like, no, this isn't what's wrong with me, right? Like this, like, like we put this in boxes of like, oh, well, you're too emotional. You have to deal with it this way, or you have to shut it down, or you have to deal with your nervous system and all these things. But it's like, what if I'm just feeling? It's like it's shifting that focus from like my feelings are too much for myself and others, like I'm too emotional, I'm too sensitive, I'm too dramatic, to just being like, I feel and that's okay. Like I'm sensing what's around me, like having a different perspective. And especially like as a feeling person, like you said, like touched it, like feeling this, that, and the other thing. Like this weekend for me, I was so in this feeling mode that it becomes sometimes so overwhelming. But it's learning the tools to cope with that and understand what it is, whether it's mine or whether it's someone else's, or what the trigger is, or how I can come back to myself and just be like, this is okay. There's nothing wrong with feeling this much. Let's just reshift this, like let's meditate, let's go out into nature. Let's just kind of like find ways to get help with this instead of being like, well, I'm wrong for feeling like this. I have to stop it.
And there's a few things. There's a few really important things around being an empath. Like one of them is you have to have space, like you keep talking about. Like empaths, we need a lot of space, tons of space to process, space to be, space to receive all that we are, like nature. That's why I love nature. Nature doesn't talk back. You're just like, here, I'm here for you. I'm your quiet space. And we also need grounding. Like we need deep, deep, deep roots and capacity to hold all that we are. It's kind of like, can you imagine? I mean, anybody that knows Tony Robbins, for example, like he's got such huge energy, right? Can you imagine him as a child? People probably thought there was something really wrong with this kid.
Yeah.
Like, what is the matter with this kid? He's got ADD or something.
From a human design perspective, his emotional solar plexus is so activated.
Yeah, like he's super open, right? And here he is. What a blessing he is for so many people in terms of empowerment, because he can fill a stadium of people. His energy can be felt around the entire stadium of, he can stretch himself as big as a whole stadium and fill up that space and activate people. That is a huge gift. So as women, especially, and as women empaths, we're working through some ancestral conditioning that told us that being emotional means there's something wrong with you and you need to go, you're hysterical, and you need to go to the asylum, right? You're going to get shunned if you're like that. They told us that all that we're feeling on our moon cycles is uncomfortable for everybody else. So you have to hide that and shun that too. I mean, there's all this conditioning that we've been given through the ages, and we are now having the opportunity to just like peel that back and say, no, actually, I'm like a female version of Tony Robbins. I am a huge angel of light, and I am here to be in service. And I have got to unfurl my wings and spread them as wide as I can and open my heart as big as I can to share this huge agape love I have to share with the world. And on my way to doing that in a clean and beautiful way, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to go through icky, sticky stuff that feels uncomfortable for me and everybody else in order to clear out my pipes of all this gunk so that I can love that cleanly and beautifully. And so have some grace for me while I become the grace that I'm meant to be. That I think is where we're at. So many of us, if that resonates for anyone listening, it's like, trust that inner knowing.
Which can be hard, especially when you start this, like you said, because there's so many of these boxes that we're trying to break free from, right? It's like everything you do is labeled into some sort of box. So like to be yourself and to show up yourself is not only uncomfortable for you because you're so used to being a certain way for so long, but it's uncomfortable for the people around you. And I feel like, especially when I like really recognized that mother wound and I went to heal, I was so triggering for like my family and my friends. And because it was like, well, who am I outside of who they believe I am by their standards? So it's like a scary and it's a big and it's a powerful thing at the same time. It's like, yeah, it is such a big thing that more of us obviously like on this journey we're coming into.
And, it's really that recognition that there are these boxes and there are these archetypes, and we have been expected to play roles, and those don't always feel true or right. And when we try to shove ourselves into that smaller space, it actually creates greater conflict and suffering for everybody around us than if we're just honest and be the actual size we are, however big that is. Just be that. Just be your bigness, whatever how big that is, And it's okay to be big, you know. You don't have to conform to this idea of the tiny, frail, helpless woman in distress that needs, you know, the knight in shining armor to come and rescue her. That's, you know, when you're a warrior, that's just going to kill you over time, because that's not who you are. That lie strips you of all of it. It makes you so tight to be small like that. When everything inside of you is like, unfurl, open up, expand, be as big as you need to be, light your heart up, shine. And so we're being called forth to do that. And there's just, there's a lot that comes up on the journey to shining.
For sure. I'm definitely feel like I'm really trying to take up my space, especially like in love and like stuff like that, where it's like, I've spent so long trying to be what I thought other people wanted me to be, because that would make me worthy, right? If I was what they wanted me to be, then they would love me. Right. So it's like, just what you're saying now for me has been like a huge lesson the last couple of years when it comes to like romance and love and relationships in general. It's like, how can I take up the space as myself and be okay with, if I'm not for you, it's not a reflection of me, you know? And so it's hard to do and it's scary to do, because I have 30 plus years of this trigger of like, oh, well, I have to be this certain way or else I'm not worthy, to then like, well, how can I speak my mind and say what I need to say and be who I need to be and not worry about not being your standard, you know? It's like this conflict. And I just take this, like, for me, I just have this like 3-minute thing where I'm just like, just take a minute and then say it, or whatever it is, right? To just like come back to myself in that moment, instead of going into that trigger of like, oh, I can't say that, it's too much. Oh, I can't do that, it's too much. It's like, how can I just be raw and honest? And like, if you're not here for it, then you're not here for it. But it's a scary thing.
It is a scary thing, because there's a lot of patterns to unweave, you know, like being transparent and honest with ourselves is the first step.
Absolutely.
And, you know, there's huge patterns in the feminine collective of repression, because we exercise the muscle of repression to avoid worse consequences, right? For generations and generations and generations. Now we're being invited, you know, to step out and be free. And our ancestors want us to be free, because that's why they did all the things that they did, so that one day we would be free. So when our ancestors watch us cage ourselves, I suspect it drives them slightly mad. Like, why are you doing that? You actually have the freedom to be yourself. Don't put yourself in a box, because that was my life, not yours. You get the opportunity to be free. So I feel like that requires us to be courageous, because it's probably generations and generations, and who knows if it ever happened, that a woman was free on earth, free from shame, free from judgment, free from labels, free from control, subjugation. I'm sure that experience was had, but like, can you find it in your ancestry? And so we get to create that for ourselves now. We get to define what that is, what that looks like, and how we live in peace within ourselves, and how we live in peace with our counterparts, you know, there's like more genders now than ever. And I think that's because people are tired of this polarization. And it doesn't feel true to box each other in and to have wars over these kinds of petty concerns. I feel like we are moving into a space of spectrum where we can appreciate each other's differences and the beauty that we all are inherently by design. And this is why I love that human design exists. And, you know, you can look up your birth chart and you can find out your life's plans. And I know you and I have talked about gene keys. I love the gene keys. It's like, it's tied in with that human design, and it's tied in with your astrology and the I Ching, which is just this beautiful ancient system for understanding your human self and the lessons we're here to learn. And when I saw my gene keys chart for the first time, it was like, oh my gosh, this is exactly all the things my mind's been doing since day one.
Yeah.
Like, wow, right there on one piece of paper. It's just like a map.
Yeah.
For my human consciousness.
That to me was a game changer too. When I like saw it and I was just like, oh my gosh, like there's, like I said, for me, it was like seeing myself on there. It was like all of these things that I thought were wrong, it's just who I am, right? So it's just like, for me, it was that like path to like self-love and self-acceptance. It's just like, okay, like I don't have to like be any different, or anything that is different is this conditioning that I'm soaking up energy from others, you know? Just like that permission to like let that go and just be who I am. So yeah, it's just a beautiful reminder to like come back to yourself of like, this is okay. You know, there's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah. And when you notice that you have an emotional center, it's like, well, it all makes sense. Or
Mm-hmm.
maybe on your chart, you have empathy and you're like, well, of course, that's why I feel everything,
Yeah.
you know? And
Yeah.
so I love that. Yes. And for me, it was also hand in hand with the message I got in the Second Wave book that I wrote, The Second Wave, Transcending the Human Drama. I channeled this message about the thumbprint. Like, we have a unique thumbprint on our bodies, and they've proven they're unique. Like, how many humans ever existed? But these are unique. These thumbprints somehow are unique. And I thought, that's the proof that I'm exactly who I need to be. I wasn't a mistake. Like,
Mm-hmm.
other people might not like certain things that are happening in our interaction, but I'm fine. My thumbprint is perfect. It was given to me. I am this. And I feel like the gene keys, the human design charts, and whatever other way systems used to define yourself, to find yourself, to discover yourself, to figure out, to see it more clearly, I should say, that gives even more reinforcement to the fact that you are a unique thumbprint. Because when you put your birth date and time and location and, you know, these facts of you into one of these systems, and then you start reading what it has to say about you, and it's resonating through your body like the biggest truth you've ever seen, that's the proof to me that we're all by design.
Yeah.
There's no mistakes. So then it's just about learning. It's about taking the
Mm-hmm.
journey. And I love these as tools of relationship to
Oh, yeah.
understand what the frictions are between
Mhm.
us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like in parenting or relationships or anything like that has helped me so much more to like, especially in relationships, I think there's a lot of times we try and fix somebody, right? Because they don't meet our standards. So this is just helpful in being like, no, this is who they are. Can we just love them and accept them as that, instead of trying to condition and change and, you know, like twist and heal, and like, no, they'll do their own path. They'll have their own journey. And especially with your kids, right? Like for mine, I'm like, it's so helpful to see that. But I wanted to go back. So like in the book, I know like there was a little section that you were actually talking about inner authority, which I thought was really cool because it really triggered human design, right? Because that's the one thing that we teach is like coming back to yourself, like coming back to your own way of like knowing within yourself. So that was just something that as you like got on human design, it triggered. But I did want to go to, you were talking about that agape love. And there was a paragraph that I wrote down. I wanted to just read from your book. And I wanted you to maybe just like go into a little more detail on that specifically. But I just thought it was so beautiful. And especially like from a parenting perspective, it's the thing that like I feel like I'm trying to do with my kids that wasn't done with me. But you said, be courageous enough to let your child sit in the stench of his coyotes as you shower him with love. Let your child witness his stubbornness to receive, to act, to speak. Let him witness his self-destruction in the face of your clear boundaries and your undying love. Don't rescue him from his pain and be there to hold his hand. So I feel like for me, my mom was very much like, I had to do it her way. I had to do the things that she wanted me to do. And as I got older, I realized I would hit this point where it's like when things got hard, I would just throw up my hands, right? Because she was so controlling, that sense of like coming in and doing things or telling me I was doing it wrong or anything. And so with my kids, I always, even whether they brush their hair or not, whether they dress, would seem like little things, but I want them to have their own accountability and not be like, well, you're doing this wrong, let me do it for you. And so my mom will still even be like, oh my gosh, they look like they rolled out of bed, or they look homeless. And I'm like, this is what they chose. And I know it's like little things, but to me, that's like big. And this just really like gave me chills, because I think it's so important to guide and support our kids and not do it for them. Because I think that in my experience has caused a lot of my pain, was just feeling unworthy as I was. And that's like, for me, that's what came up. But I just thought that was so beautiful.
Yeah, I really feel your heart in this right now, this conversation, and giving your children what you always wanted to receive is such a huge part of being a mother. And when we define our mother, we get to define what mother we are choosing to be. And then life shows us some other things that challenge that idea. And then we get to expand even bigger, right? Because our kids are part of the conversation. Because this is a relationship like no other, largely because we're connected biologically with our kids. The mother and the child are always connected throughout life, which is different than all the other relationships. because all the other relationships, you're actually not energetically or DNA or biologically connected for life. You are just connected, as long as you choose to be. In the mother-child relationship, it's like a permanent connection with this other being. So it takes an even greater level of discernment and respect and honor of that relationship dynamic so that the child can be who they need to be. This was a really big part of my growing up with my mom, was that, and one of the big lessons I learned in my life was the power of word, the power of storytelling. So in some context, in some way, storytelling can be so reassuring. Like as a mother, when you tell your child a story of them from their life, you're like their historian until they can remember themselves. And at a certain point, and early on, hopefully, you realize how important it is to tell those stories in such a way that it gives them grace for themselves. Because sometimes we tell those stories out of frustration, or like, oh my gosh, this part of you is just so hard to deal with, so we tell the problem story about the person. But whatever story you as a mother tell about your child it forms part of their identity, because you're like their historian. So it's really important to, number one, I believe, be really conscious about the story you're telling about the child. Give it high vibrational meaning, like give it self-empowerment, give it, inner power, give it significance in a high vibrational way, like whatever you can do with that. And then at some point, you've got to let them tell their own story. So when they're ready to start telling their own story of themselves, you back off and you just witness as they try on different costumes, different identities, different expressions. And this is the part of parenting that's hard. If you've been trained to be perfect by your upbringing, like let's say your parents were super controlling and they wanted you to, like, this is how you demonstrate perfection, is that you are perfect and you get straight A's and you do what we're told and you dress a certain way and your room is super picked up and clean and all that. So when you're giving your child space to express and to try on different costumes and figure out things for themselves, that takes a tremendous inner capacity to let go of the narcissist pattern. Because the narcissist pattern is all about appearances on the outside while struggling on the inside. And it's a huge pattern in our culture. I know I'm 52, my generation, there's a lot of talk about empaths and narcissists. So that when you got to find that within yourself, that pattern's in you if you've been raised in these generations and you experience the perfection and how to be perfect, you've got to face that inner narcissist and be like, not on my watch. My kid has the freedom to be who they are on the inside. And I trust that as they try on these different costumes, they'll figure it out for themselves what's best for them. And if being best for them is being Linus, and being stinky and carrying their stinky blankie behind them, so be it. Mm-hmm. At some point, they'll get out of that. They'll bring themselves out. So this is really about like teaching inner fire, inner spark, allowing space for the inner spark to happen, and being okay with the external judgment, right? Because that's what it's really about. Because we're afraid, like, our kids go to school and then the other parents are going to judge us because we're not doing the perfection game. Mm-hmm. I just made a choice. I'd rather my kids struggle to find themselves and try on different costumes and figure things out and get messy and make mistakes while they're home and I can help them, than wait till they're 40 years old like me and burn their whole life down because it was a lie. Mm-hmm. I wanted them to learn it early and find themselves early so they didn't go through the pain of having a divorce.
Yeah, that's powerful. My daughter's 11 and I feel like she is going to get to that point one day where she's going to be like, okay, I want to take care of myself, right? Like there's whatever it is that she's dealing with, her dad and I are divorced. She went through the experience with my son's father, which was traumatic for her, I know. So I know she's got a lot going on, and all that for her was before the age of 7. So it is that first life cycle that she has a lot that she's carrying with her. And at the end of the day, like I used to really like shame myself for that, or like judge myself of like, oh, I created this pain in her. I created this. But at the same time, I have to, on the flip side, just be like, she chose me and she chose this life for the lessons that she needs to learn. And I've come to this knowledge now to be able to go back and now hold her hand and guide her and do all these things without controlling her, because I know that but that's what I say to her. She'll say something to me and she'll be like, oh, well, Nana, which is my mom, she's like, oh, she says like people are going to bully me at school for this. And I'm like, okay, they might. But when you're 18 or 20 and you're out of the house and high school doesn't matter anymore, you're going to be you. You're not going to have created this face, this mirror, whatever, of this version of you to fit in, and then carry that around until, you're 20, 30, 40, 50 and realize that that's not who you really are. Like I did that for my life, right? It took me until I was 30 to kind of just get out of these situations and be like, I have been a shell of myself for 30 years. Like now, how do I figure out who I am? And I'm 35 now, and that journey is I'm still in it, right? There's still so much to uncover. It's like an onion. It's just like you peel back a layer and there's another one and another one, another one. But I would rather her be herself now instead of having to worry about all the judgments. And she's going to, right? It's going to hurt. It does. If a kid bullies you, she has said to me, like, kids at school aren't that nice to her. But I'm never going to be like, well, you should wear this. You should brush your hair this way. You should put your hair up this way. You should look this certain way to fit in. Like, no, it sucks. It hurts. It's painful, but learning lessons now instead of like being 18 and just like kick you to college and get out there and figure it out yourself. Like you said, this is what we're here for, is to let them go through this and be able to help them now, as opposed to them having to figure out by themselves later. And at that point, not even probably want to talk to you about it.
Yeah, because also if you set the perfection pattern, like I received the perfection pattern. So am I going to call my mom and say I'm really screwing it up if we haven't had those kind of conversations? And so my mom did a really great step in the middle. So for anybody who's like, well, I don't know how to have those conversations with my kid, this is awful. And I see what you're saying, but I just can't do it. Well, there's psychotherapists out there. There's energy healers. There's like teen counselors. There's other people that are in those spots that can help support kids to go through those. If you personally don't feel like you have the capacity, you can always bring those people in. And that's what my mom did. She brought in, a psychiatrist when I was 15. And I got into the habit of going to get help, like having someone as my advocate to help me sort me out. Mm-hmm. And it's not the total solution, but it's a good step in the right direction. And then in the meantime, like I think mothers can learn how to be with themselves, how to, like you've been doing, find yourself, find a system, like understand who you are, whatever your system of inquiry is that reveals you to you, like find that, be that, walk that path, deepen your roots, expand your capacity to hold space. And then you can start to lean into some of these uncomfortable conversations. And as a mother, if you're doing it well, at some point the child is going to push back against you. If you're doing it well, and when I say well, I mean you're helping them find their inner power and their inner voice, and you're making it safe for them to do that. At some point, they're going to push back against you and push you out because it's safe to push against you. They know you're going to love them anyway. That's actually a sign that you're doing it well, I found out afterwards. Mm-hmm. It didn't feel good when it was happening because I'm like, wait, I'm being a good mom. I'm being safe. I'm being kind. I'm listening. I'm being loving. Why are they being mean to me? And I was like, oh, because it's safe to push against me to find yourself. And that part, it happens sometime in teen years. And to me, when my older son did that, it felt like a second birth. Like it literally felt like he was clawing his way out of my energy field and just like a butterfly out of a cocoon and just flying free. And it hurt. I mean, my heart just, it is a very painful experience to go through when they do that. And it's necessary because he has to be himself. And I think that we as mothers, we have to be strong and courageous enough to let that rebirth happen so that they can be free from the nest. Otherwise, we keep repeating the situation where there's like 40-year-old people coming back to live with their parents. You know what I'm saying? Like not that that's a problem, it's a stage of growth, but it's like, I love Richard Rudd's material in the Gene Keys because he talks about how in each stage of a development, whatever didn't get healed in the one stage now is compounded by the next stage. And then that gets compounded by the next stage and the next stage. So when you finally get to the place that you can unwind this and do healing work on it, you probably got some pent up stuff along the way, that needs rewiring with love. And so as parents, our job is to, as much as possible, and it's not going to be perfect because we're here to learn soul curriculum lessons. It's not like people are here to learn lessons. There's going to be struggle. There's going to be problems, challenges, things to overcome and move through. So we can't prevent that. What we can do is give them the wiring on the inside at each level to really make that next step. And the wiring from, to 21 is me, identity, IQ, my identity, me breaking free from your ideas about me. We've got to be okay with that part as parents and let them do the work and just not take it personally. So if you're taking it personally, that's your work.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I had to do. I had to face taking it personally.
Yeah, absolutely. We're all mirrors for each other.
Totally.
That's why I always say, like, my kids are the biggest lesson of my life, right? Because I'm like constantly seeing my reflection back in them. And sometimes I don't like it. I'm just like, oh my gosh, what am I?
That was me. That's what I would have done if I'd have been free. See?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So powerful. You talked about after you had your son, that like wounding that came up. I know for me, so I had my daughter at 24 before I even got on the spiritual path, before I even started therapy, before I was even consciously aware of like anything going on in my life. But like after I had her, I like literally could not drive without having panic attacks. It was like 6 months of like, anytime I got behind a wheel, I was just like, I couldn't breathe. And I felt like I was going to have to pull over. And I know you explained that you had some similar, post-traumatic stress like that after you had your son. So how do you, like, for anyone maybe who's thinking about becoming pregnant, because I know you also talk about like whatever you feel in yourself is basically what your child is marinating in, right? You use that term and I think it was so beautiful. It's just like, because you are marinating for 9 months, right? So it's like, if you're planning to become a mother, what work would you suggest, that, because I feel like it's not something, this is a long, slow process, right? Like, it's not like I said, it's you peel back a layer and another layer. And there's things that now, even like 4 or 5 years after my journey, that I'm peeling back and like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize like that was the cause of this. Or like, there's always something to heal. But yeah, what would you recommend as like steps just in this process?
Yeah. So first of all, acceptance. That's the first one. So anybody who's there is like, I already had my kids. I know I screwed them up. Oh, damn. Well, join the club. So that's part of the design, right? So just acceptance. Like, that's just number one. And life has its own plans. And the child that's going to be birthed through any mother is choosing that mother to be birthed through. Warts and all, So like, whatever your crap is, your kid picked it, okay? And the reason why is because they have some soul's curriculum, and you're the perfect vessel that kicks them off into that soul's curriculum. And your ancestry and whatever happened in your ancestry, they need that stuff too. So they are choosing you because they're getting embodied in your frequency. So what's the best thing that you can do? Don't try to be perfect, number one, like, because that's wrench in the whole system. I would say learn to accept yourself. If you can accept yourself as you are and learn about yourself and understand yourself really well before you have a child, then what happens is that you are going to be able to navigate all the situations that come up with a much deeper understanding of yourself, and you'll have spaciousness to see your child for who they are rather than as a reflection of yourself. Because children deserve to be more than mini-me's. They deserve to be themselves. And in order to do that, you have to really hold yourself. Like, you've got to have yourself, like you like have your own back. When you can do that, you can hold space for the child in a whole different way. And no matter whether you're, never had a child yet and are thinking about it, and so you can do all this pre-work, awesome. You're still going to have challenges. You can't avoid those. So if you're doing it to avoid challenge, that just give that up. Accept that there's going to be challenges because that's part of the journey. And if you've already had kids and they're somewhere in between, start now. Like, it's never too late to start to understand yourself, to create more emotional resiliency, more capacity to hold space for yourself and others, that process can start today. So it doesn't matter. And if your kids are already grown and they have their own families, here is the cool thing. It's not too late because you are embodiment connected with your child always and forever. So you can do the work if you're 70 years old, and it will ripple and heal your children too. 7 generations forward and 7 back. The more you understand yourself and activate those healing pathways and bring peace and harmony and love and acceptance to your choices and who you've been the whole way in your journey and all the things that happened and your life path, and the more you bring acceptance and love to all of that, the more you heal your ancestors for 7 generations forward and 7 back, including your kids and your grandkids. So it's never too late. And the mother has a very interesting central position in a family that can be super helpful for healing family dynamics. And so you can take that on at any moment and you'll be in great service.
And so if you are, I know you touched on Tony Robbins before too. I think it's
walks across fire, and I lead people across fire too. So
right? Yeah, he's such just like a beautiful example. I know he talks about his mother a lot too. And he's like, if I hadn't have had those experiences with her, I wouldn't be who I am today. So if there is a man listening to this now, like what would you say for them in this mother wound? Because it is, obviously it's powerful and it's big for the woman, the divine, feminine, all that stuff, but that is also in men as well. Like this isn't just for the mother figure. So what would you suggest for them?
Oh, it's powerful. I would say heal your relationship with your mother, because otherwise you'll attract it in a spouse, and then you'll be operating in a lot of pain in your relationship. And if that's already happened and you're in a painful relationship dynamic, heal your relationship with your mother and you will clear up a lot, because that son-mother relationship is a very powerful one, especially in the cases where the father figure was wounded, coming from a sense of wounding, maybe insecurity or unavailability, lack of emotional expression, control. There's a lot of unhealed masculine patterns. All of those have to do with feeling unloved and unwanted by the mother. And that's just simply because she didn't know how to love and want herself. So you see how pervasive it is. We have a culture where just about everybody agrees, I either feel unwanted, unloved, unseen, unheard, there's like a whole list of them. It comes because it all comes out of the womb. So for the men, I would say, heal your masculine. Here's what my son is doing, which is really beautiful. My eldest son, for a little while, he resonated with me more. So he kind of, at some point, decided not to see his dad, and he focused on being with me in my house for a while. And I know that was very painful for his dad. And what ended up happening, though, is that he was healing his feminine side, right? Because there were a lot of assertions and projections made about me and my journey. And if you read my book, Awakening to Me, you'll understand why some of those assertions and projections were made and some of the pain that was there. But my son really healed that. And then I started noticing his hair was getting really long. Like he just had this big mane of beautiful hair, which I was like, wow, he's gorgeous, no matter what he does with his hair. But it was like, wow, you're really gorgeous. And then he started letting his fingernails grow out. And I was getting really uncomfortable because I'm like a little conventional, and I have my narcissist, well within me that I've been healing, the perfect one, the appearance is one, I'm like, oh, okay. So it was big work for me. But see, I was getting concerned that he wasn't stepping into his power as a man, that he was avoiding his masculine. And he would not accept my new masculine, my new husband, even though my new husband is like, he's just like amazing. He's a diamond of a healed masculine man. But even with that, it was too painful for a while. Well, what's amazing is how my son has found his own way. So now he is doing this initiation. It's all about initiations. He's claiming his own initiation into manhood. And what that looks like for him is repeating a tradition that his father wouldn't do with him. So My son's grandfather taught his father how to fix cars. They would take their Mustang apart completely and put it all back together. And that was father-son time. My son's father refused to do that process with him, which was really hurtful to my son. And a deep part of wounding, along with a lot of other things, right, that I fought and I objected to and I was angry about. But now what I see, the beauty coming out of that initiation never happening through his father, is the beauty of my son claiming that initiation for himself. So he has enrolled himself in auto mechanic school. So he is in a program now at the community college. He's going to be graduating in 2 years. He's learning how to fix cars. He's got mentors that he's selected himself to guide him through this process. And I know it's about so much more than cars. It's about him claiming his ability to heal himself and heal his masculine and to be his own father figure for himself. There's just huge power in that. And there's just a lot of men out there, like young men who had divorced mothers, who had this same conflict between the masculine and the feminine. It was like the War of the Roses, it was like just so much battle. Where do they find themselves? Because if they embrace their masculine, are they then, betraying their mothers? And so as moms, we need to set our sons free. And a huge part of that is any place you're hooked by their father, like literally any place that man can hook you, you got to release that hook with love. And you got to stop the war. And it happens inside of you. Because as you heal that, it opens up the possibility for your sons to heal. I've been doing this work now for 10 years, releasing all the hooks. Every single time he did something that made me really angry, I went inside, I did the healing. I didn't work it out with him because there was no point. I came inside and did the healing myself. I removed the Velcro in myself so I could be free and my sons could be free. And my sons' bodies don't have to be at war because they've got half of me and half of their dad. That's the work I think moms can also do to help our sons.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. As a single mom with a young son, I just work on my part, and I know that I can only heal what I can heal, and so I just always send unconditional love, acceptance, and forgiveness. You stay there though, but I can do that within myself.
Boundaries.
Exactly. So yeah, thank you for sharing that from, the man and, what we can do as women, as mothers to like help them heal that as well. Because anything that especially, I don't know, on my journey, it's like anything that pains me or wounds me or comes forth, it's like the only thing that I can do is to give that to myself, right? It's like that expectation of somebody else needs to give it to you is false. It's you giving it to yourself. That's what's really going to heal that. So that's beautiful that your son is taking that upon himself to just kind of learn that and do that. And like you said, it's so much more than just, what it is. It's so deep for him, and that's beautiful.
Yeah, it's really profound. And he never told me that in a person, and this is another skill that mothers can develop, is the ability to listen to the souls of our children.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever you need to get into the space that you can listen to the souls of your I like to do ceremony, and I like to have deep meditations, and I like to, really open up that part of me to listen deeply. And that's where those insights come in. And they come in when they're ready, and they come in if I'm not fighting it, right? So if I'm angry and I'm blaming and judging, then I'm not going to get the insight. But if I can notice I'm doing that, release it, open, and be quiet, that's when these insights come in. And then I'll check them kind of like in casual conversation with my son. I'll be like, so it feels like this is kind of like this. Is that true? And he's like, oh, yes, it's totally that. But it's just cool because we have this ability to do that with our kids. We can tune in to their hearts.
Yeah. Absolutely. There was another quote that I took that I feel like this was just like the perfect segue to from your book, just like in meditation or in getting in touch with that side of your child or anything like that. But you said the volume of the mental chatter drowns out the quiet voice of the divine mother. And I think that's so powerful because, I talk a lot about meditation, and a lot of people will be like, well, my mind's so busy, I can't meditate. And I still even struggle with it, from a human design perspective, my ajna is defined. So I'm constantly creating energy, and it's just like, sometimes it doesn't ever silence itself. And for me personally, I feel like the trick is to pay attention to it, right? Not to just be like, quiet, like you can't be here now, right? Because that just like makes it's like giving attention to it, and then it just like flares up. And from being an emotional person and the whole energetic connection within myself is emotions are tied to my mind, basically. Right. So that's that constant like cycle I battle with. But I just think, I guess, like, what would you recommend, or how do you, because I think that is a very real, not fear, but it's a very real struggle for a lot of people, right? Is getting that to quiet down so we can hear. And the first time somebody told me, when I first started this journey, somebody was talking about intuition, and I was like, well, I don't even know, like, how do I hear it? How do I feel it? And they're like, it's love, right? So it's going to be quiet. It's like that divine feminine. It's love. It's not going to yell at you. It's not going to like overpower the ego. It's just going to sit calmly and wait for you to just like, shh, right? And like kind of sift through it to hear it.
So the thing to understand about the mind chatter is it happens when we don't feel safe. So that's why grounding and connecting with something bigger than you that you trust, like the earth, helps make it safe enough to relax. Mm-hmm. It's really, the nervous system is unbalanced because there's a lot of scary stuff. And, our minds can get busy predicting outcomes to avoid consequences or to avoid making mistakes. So a lot of this has to do with tuning into what your fears are and facing them in a safe container. So like, if you can get safe, meditate, like sitting on the earth or going for a run, even to quiet your mind and then sitting on the earth, like that is helpful. If you need, sometimes it's helpful to be around people who have already adopted a frequency of safety inside of themselves to help you entrain to create that frequency inside of yourself, which is why it's helpful to study with people who've walked the path a little longer. And then I really like the path of animism. So animism is a form of spirituality, earth spirituality, where it's all about sacred objects. And those sacred objects represent psychological things you're working through. So in the Q'ero people from Peru, they work on what's called a mesa. And your mesa is like your portable altar of your sacred objects. And each one of those objects has meaning, and they're usually stones. And the stones themselves have frequencies and different gifts that they can impart to you as you hold them. So sometimes having stone friends is really helpful for facing yourself. Mm-hmm. And because it's tangible, you can put them in your hand. If your mind is really busy, you can put these stones in your hands, and the stones are helping you at some level to access information through your body. Because if it's hard to come through your mind, it can still come through your body. So for example, in my program, we take the gene keys chart out as the map of your suffering and your enlightenment, mm-hmm. The other flip side. We take that and we every sphere is a stone. So we methodically go through 1 month at a time, and all you do is hold the stone. That's it. I just say, hold the stone, maybe read the chapter, and because I use Richard Rudd's material. He's a great teacher, and he's downloaded the I Ching. It's like beautiful. Mm-hmm. I'm just bringing the animism part to it.
Yeah.
So it's like, just listen to that meditation he already recorded and hold this stone. It's going to help, mm-hmm. And it's also giving yourself support. So what a lot of people don't realize is that you can decide what can play with you in your psychic energy field. You get to decide that. So just like you can set a boundary with your former spouse and say, well, you can't visit the house today or ever, whatever. You can do the same thing. You can open sacred space. I teach people how to open sacred space. And there's an invocation in both of those books, the Second Wave book and the Love is Fierce book, to call in your highest support and to set and claim your space. Like, I'm calling in the highest and best for me in this moment. And my desire is to be quiet. So I'm calling in the highest and best support for me to be quiet. I'm going to hold my stones and sit in nature and feel this shadow frequency that's getting my attention and contemplate it. Mm-hmm. And contemplation is different than meditation, because meditation is like you're trying to be quiet. Contemplation is you explore it, like you were talking about.
Mm-hmm. Someone recently
asked, that makes sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I know, like, energetically too, I meditate in one spot in my house, but I've got plants around, I've got my crystals, I have my candles, I have my incense, because all of that like feels like home to me, right? It's like, and I know, like, I was listening to a meditation, and the spiritual teacher was talking about when you have a specific space that you meditate in, like your energy and the energy you bring in, like is there, right? So it's like, if I've been on a trip or if I'm feeling emotionally activated and I come home and like I go to that side of my room, I immediately feel safe. Like you said, it is creating that safe space. So you don't, if you're in an apartment building or whatever it is, like I feel you don't have to like be in, you can bring nature to you too, right? Like you can have those elements. Like I said, I have plants, and there's just something about that to me that is so like grounding and safe. And that is a huge part of it, right? Because if you're not safe, like if I meditate in nature, but maybe there's like a lot of people around, sometimes I don't feel safe and I can't shut it out. And I'm like, my mind is on everybody else, but where it should be. So I think like you can definitely creating that within your own space in your home. But it's interesting that with the crystals, because somebody recently asked me what my favorite crystal was. And I was like, I don't even, half of the crystals that I have, I don't even know the names for them. It was just that being in the space when I came upon them, there was something that emotionally called me to it. Like, I need this one. This one will do something for me. And then cleansing it and like sitting. And so I was like, lay them around, or sometimes, I just grab one and put it on my foot, or, it's just like being intuitive about it. Like, I think for myself, and I think this has been part of my journey, is like, I have that imposter syndrome where it's like, I feel like I need to know everything to make it make sense, but I don't. I can trust, it's coming back and trusting that intuition of like, hey, I'm feeling this way. This green stone that I have, don't know what it's called, but it feels like it's calling me right now. It feels good. I'm gonna trust that.
Yeah, and then the trusting part is actually building a pathway for more trust.
Mm-hmm.
The more you act in that trust, the more it builds. The more you practice sitting in your sacred space and contemplating and being present with your stones and your plants and everything you've created, the more that creates a frequency of safety in that space. And this is the secret to like Peru. When you go to Peru, you visit any of these sacred places where there's like these temples and things. If you've ever walked into one of those, you feel the energy of it. Like, it's like, whoa, it's so amazing. Because people have prayed there and set their intentions there and brought their hearts open there for centuries and probably thousands of years, some of these places. So it's full. Mm-hmm. And so you can create that full space right where you are for yourself too.
Mm-hmm.
But it takes practice. You got to do it.
Yeah. It's a journey, and it's commitment, it's self-trust. And that in itself, I think is why meditation is so, what's the word I'm looking for? Not triggering, but maybe that's the right word. Because some people are just like so against it, right? Because they think they don't know how to be with themselves.
It does require you to be with yourself. The stones help. That's why at least I have friends with me when I'm being with me.
Yeah. But it's such a powerful thing. I always recommend it to everybody, even if you start with 2 minutes. Do you know what I mean? Like it's that slow self-trust, that slow thing because for me now, it's like, if I'm really struggling, I don't know, if I feel unbalanced, that's the thing that I know. And it's often in those moments, the thing that I resist, right? Like when I'm super emotional, I'm like, I don't want to sit with myself for 15 minutes. Like, no, but it's the thing that I need. It's always the thing that.
It's the thing you need. Exactly. And you just commit to it, and if you're 15 minutes sitting there, like some of these shadows in the Gene Keys, they're hard ones to sit with, and once we activate it in the program, you're in the energy of it, even if you don't sit with it. So that means you could be reacting to it, which is why then people start to learn to sit with it and just be with it.
Yeah.
Be aware of it. And it's uncomfortable. And then by sitting with discomfort helps to expand your ability to sit with discomfort, which is part of the whole expanding yourself outside of your limitations conversation we were having before.
Mm-hmm. The Gene Keys is such a cool thing to explore and contemplate. I think like my core wounding, I believe, is 24, gate 24. And that's just like codependence, addiction. And so it's like so much of it like makes sense to me of like why I like cycle through so many relationships. And it gets so deep and it gets so big, but this is.
It sure gets deep.
Yes, it does.
It does get deep.
Yeah, this has been a beautiful conversation. Is there anything that you want people to know in closing that we haven't touched on today?
Well, if I don't know when this is going out, but I'm sure I'll do it again. So I do have an event coming up, Calling All Earth Mamas. So I feel really passionate, and the Love is Fierce book talks about this. I feel really passionate that mothers, we have the best chance of working together for a better world and a better humanity, because we care, because we have kids and we have an investment. And that's even if you're a fur baby mama, so all kinds of mama-ing welcome. So I'm having an event Calling All Earth Mamas to invite mothers to come together and receive an initiation at a high level on this planet, this plane of existence, to really acknowledge yourself as an Earth Mama and to receive some healing. So we'll have some healings from the Karo people and the Incan medicine people that I have in the valley. They'll be doing some healing work with us. And we'll be doing some ancestral work and some connection with our ancestors. So this particular one is on October 30th, which is the day before the Day of the Dead. The Day of the Dead is when the veil is so thin, we can really access all of our ancestors and guides. So that's the reason for the timing, and it's going to be powerful, and to come together in community and dream a new dream for the planet.
That sounds amazing. Amazing.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, I will leave the information on the show notes, but where can people find you?
KerriHummingbird.com, Kerri, hummingbird.com.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rochelle.
So cool. I'll talk to you soon.